Capcom is one of the biggest video game developers, with close to 1,000 of games under their belt. That is so many, in fact, that the full list on Wikipedia had to be split into multiple separate pages. Games like Resident Evil, Street Fighter, Devil May Cry, and over 100 other critically acclaimed titles have sold well over 1 million copies each. And yet, Capcom's now fastest selling game, Monster Hunter Wilds, is somehow sitting on mixed reviews on Steam. What happened? Well, obviously the developers prioritized graphics above all else, making it practically impossible to run the game even on the highest end hardware. But at the same time, it actually looks terrible. What are these ugly PS3 graphics? No, PS1 even. That is what I would say if I could run this ridiculously easy game, but sadly I can't, because Evil Denuvo locked me out of playing. Disregard the fact that I've accumulated 100 hours of playtime in 5 days since posting this. Focus instead on how this has the worst menus, the worst presentation, the worst roster of monsters, and after over 20 titles in the series, the worst Monster Hunter release. Sounds a bit dramatic? Yeah, let's dial it back a bit. It goes without saying that some of these reviews are wildly exaggerated, but that doesn't mean that the underlying problems do not exist. And even though, thankfully, I could run the game close to 60 FPS, there were some notable dips, and that is with upscaling, which in itself doesn't always do a perfect job. I can only imagine the struggle on weaker systems, as while I managed to run the game on Steam Deck, it was more of a walk, if not a crawl, at maybe 15 frames at best on lowest settings. That's pretty bad. But minimum requirements exist for a reason, and as disappointing as they may appear, they're only for 1080p, and for any higher resolution would be significantly more demanding. Still, there were multiple demos and even a benchmark tool you could use to estimate how the game would perform on your setup. So while the performance should definitely have been better, at the very least there was no deception about it. You might not remember it that way, but issues with performance and the overall perception were quite similar for World at launch as well. Yet the situation has really changed for it since then. Now the standard practice of ship now, fix later is certainly detestable, but at least there's still a good chance for better optimization in Wilds. And that's important, as my heart goes out to all the poor souls that couldn't properly play it yet, because in my opinion, this is the best Monster Hunter game, and it's not even close. Monster Hunter Wilds saw improvements on all of the fronts. For combat, we got new wound system, where attacking the same monster part creates a temporary zone of vulnerability that takes more damage and gives the monster material upon destruction. So not only is it now easier to understand what causes the drop, but you also don't have to manually search for tiny orbs that often blended with the environment and soon despawned. Every weapon also got its own special attack to capitalize on the wounds at the cost of destroying them in a single hit. So now you're given an interesting choice: get the extra damage from hitting the wounds normally, or pop them with the special attack and benefit from its effect. In co-op, the decision-making is further extended, as now you can coordinate and leave wounds to those who would benefit from them the most. It's interesting, flashy, but most importantly, fun. Weapon movesets saw an overhaul of varying degrees, and while there are no hot swappable moves this time around, to me it felt like each weapon was given a glow-up that best highlights its strengths. In previous games, for every choice, there was an optimal option, which greatly diminished the effect of having that freedom to begin with. A similar change was made to Palicos. You no longer have to worry about their jobs, skills, or special tools. They simply do what they can, with extra abilities that can be unlocked through their quests. But only in high rank, once again simplifying the amount of things the new players have to worry about in low rank as they get used to other systems in the game. Personally, I always used to overlook Palico skills and special equipment, as it never felt particularly impactful, especially considering that I don't have much control of how it was used, making it difficult to judge optimal loadouts. So to me, it's a welcome change, though I see how people could have the opposite opinion on this. But let's continue with a list of indisputably positive changes. Being able to bring two weapons and swap between them without returning to the tent is amazing, enabling combinations like a severing weapon for tail cuts and a blunt for subsequent stuns. Having a supply box on the mount means no more runbacks of shame when you inevitably forget to take your free provisions. But more importantly, no more raging when someone in multiplayer takes all of the items for themselves. Item bar and wheels are more customizable and accessible than ever, making it significantly easier to find the right item in a pinch. And for heals and recovery items, there's no need to even look with new context-sensitive options. This is a huge improvement, as previously, if you didn't configure your loadouts to your liking, you'd spend a good chunk of the time running away from monsters as you frantically try to cycle through all of the items. Clear bestiary and having access to monster information in quest details is an amazing quality of life change. Now you can see the monster weaknesses right there as you select the quest, knowing right away what kind of element of attack to prioritize without the need to jump back and forth between the menus. Information on items you still need for wishlisted equipment shows up in the quest and monster information as well, and while things like that might seem minor, I cannot stress enough how much more pleasant it makes the overall experience. The map is now properly three-dimensional, greatly simplifying navigation. You can return from quest early, removing needless downtime. There's no need to count pixels to distinguish crown monsters. There's a centralized access to all of the traders and item collectors. You can mix and match armor variants from both body types. The variety and quality of weapon designs is miles ahead of what we had in World, and so on. You get the idea. There was clearly an intent to improve upon the established Monster Hunter systems in Wilds, and in most cases, it was successful. But to me, the most impactful change was one with the story and its characters. Not to sound controversial or anything, but Monster Hunter is a game about hunting monsters. So, understandably, some people put it up with the expectation to do just that. Jump right into the action. But that's not how it goes, especially with the recent games. They increased their focus on the story, adding more forced dialogue, cutscenes, and escort sections. In and of itself, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's certainly a conflict with the expectations and desires of a fairly large portion of the player base. The real issue, however, is that the story in these games has always been pretty bad. While this statement may sound quite subjective, the whole community is practically in a unanimous agreement on this. The plot is mediocre at its best, and is only there to justify you killing monsters in a particular sequence, but its pacing suffers from constant interruptions with exposition, and while cutscenes are often quite impressive, they only made it even more apparent how bad the rest of the storytelling is. Dialogues are awkward, reactions unnatural, and there's always a huge disconnect between the intended urgency of events and their depiction through gameplay. Monster Hunter Wilds might not have fixed all of those issues, but saying that it does a better job is a massive understatement. Sure, if you nitpick every little detail or just endlessly groan how the game is wasting your time, you're not gonna enjoy it. Wilds still requires at least some suspension of disbelief to be pleased with its narrative, but if you take the step to meet the game halfway, you might be as surprised as I was by how entertaining it is. Most of the story now takes place in low rank, making what essentially is a prolonged tutorial a much more guided experience, while also somewhat freeing up the high rank from the unwanted distractions. This change allows the game to better introduce new monsters and areas while keeping the pacing more consistent. Every mission now brings a new enemy to fight together with great looking cutscenes, ditching the previous design of having to complete 5 random quests from the list to just slightly advance the narrative and rinse and repeat. The new structure results in a more dynamic experience if you find yourself at least a tiny bit invested in it. And it is much easier to get invested as characters now feel like they've actually existed in this world prior to the beginning of the game. They have backstories, with some even having roots to the past titles. The animations have improved even further, giving character expressions a wider range of believable emotions. The lip syncing is far from perfect outside of the cutscenes, but the fact that it's there and it has something to sync with is an improvement in its own right.
I'm not psychic, but I do have pretty good ears. Ah, put her there!
I still remember how jarring it was in World to go from a proper cutscene to a dialogue with the same NPC where instead of voice acting he would just say a random phrase as I read the actual text.
Your reputations precede you.
I get it, voice acting is not cheap, especially when there's so much to be said, but does it have to be that much? And again, given how detailed everything else was in the game, it just felt bizarre and ruined immersion. Most of it is gone in Wilds, close to all of the dialogue related to the main story is fully voiced, with just a couple of exceptions like the introduction of certain traders and such. It's not a huge deal, but now I'm left wondering why they couldn't just bite the bullet on that one and voice the remaining 1% or so of interactions. Perhaps they decided that it wouldn't be scalable with the events they plan on releasing, but I'm not sure. I think it was a good opportunity to get over that bit of awkwardness once and for all. Speaking of awkwardness, and speaking, the main character is no longer mute, nor mentally challenged, at least not to the same extent. They went more for a quiet lone wolf type of a protagonist that has a handler assigned to them to keep all of the species from being put out on the brink of extinction, not that it would help them. But to be honest with you, this new dynamic between the player and the handler is really working, in my opinion. The guild authorization lines may seem redundant at first, but they build up over time for some grandiose moments like the "by my own order" banger that the main character spits out, proving that it was the right call to learn how to speak. And together with the amazing soundtrack, the cinematic nature of the game really makes you feel like you're watching this awesome show that also lets you play out its epic combat sections. And to me, it's really impressive that Capcom got to this point where I've actually enjoyed the story in Monster Hunter.
By my own order. I will slay Xochitl.
Sadly, it's not just sunshine and butterflies, and the game makes plenty of compromises to achieve all of the previously mentioned improvements. And even with them, there are numerous examples how they could be improved even further. Why can't I weapon swap without mounting, just standing next to the secret? Why can't I manually put anything in the supply box on the mount, and have to deal with multiple prompts when my inventory gets full? Why are the loadouts hidden behind even more interactions and menus now that the item box is replaced by a tent? It's something that we should be utilizing between every quest, so why not make an option to automate the loadout restocks? The map, while being much better, also comes practically pre-explored now. There are still plenty of secrets to be uncovered and a few areas that are obscured at first, but the fog of war is gone. Binoculars are nice for crown hunting, but the range at which the overlay kicks in is so short that it's ridiculous. I clearly see the whole monster, it takes up the entire screen, but no, I guess we need to be standing right next to it to see its information. Pop-up camps are neat, but getting notifications whenever they get attacked becomes annoying very quickly. It's inconsequential as well since they get repaired anyway, so there definitely should be an option to disable those distractions. Some of the buffs make your character glow or pulsate different colors, which might be fine in a fight, but I don't want to be a Christmas tree in a camp. You can access traders through Nata, but each of them has their own page despite only trading a few things. It doesn't matter with whom you're trading, so what's the point? If they didn't want to have a list of all the traders that is just too long, they could at least group NPCs by area to reduce the amount of menuing necessary. Same with item collectors. Give me a button to collect all. It can't be that hard. And for the love of God, please remove this awkward pause in between each of the dialogue sentences. The animation for smithing is the same regardless of what you're making, a weapon, armor, or some clothes for your palico. It always looks like Gemma is making a basic sword before it magically transforms into the actual item at the very last moment. If that was meant to be a joke, like the drawing meme, it gets old pretty quick. And I hate to say it, but Gemma's haircut and clothes are probably the least suitable ones she could come up with for a job as a smith. She's got quite a few problems actually, as navigation in the armor crafting menu feels awkward with the right stick controlling both the rotation of the preview model and the scrolling of the armor list, often resulting in unintended behavior. There are even options to change what the right stick controls, but the game does not memorize your choice and resets to default every time, so what's the point? What is the point of having an option to slightly change the grid size of the insect list? It doesn't even change it that much. Small weird things like that are all over the UI really. Weapons having skills now might sound good in theory, but in order to balance them, the game treats a weapon having a skill roughly as one having a decoration slot of an equivalent size. That seems fair until you realize that if a skill on a weapon is useless, it essentially means that you're missing out on a decoration slot that could house something better. And since quite a few weapons have strangely poor-fitting skills on them, there is little reason to ever use them, as there are better alternatives. It would have been better if weapon skills were more universally useful, or if at least ones with objectively worse skill would not miss out on the decoration slots. And I personally like Arshan weapons and some of their designs, but it's a bit disappointing that the current endgame weapons don't have any visual differences depending on their element, especially considering that there's no layered weapon system yet. At least let us change the look of the Arshan weapons into regular ones we're fully upgraded already. Hopefully a feature like that will be introduced soon. And then there's multiplayer, and frankly speaking, I struggle to come up with a game with less user-friendly design for co-op, let alone for a modern game. So let's figure it out together. To play with a friend, you first need to add a friend. Simple enough, you send them an invitation from the communications tab of the main in-game menu, and they can similarly find it in the invitations. If playing on different platforms, you'll have to enter the other person's ID code. After they accept, you're friends. You can also follow them. That also adds them in a separate list of users. That doesn't really have anything special about it. Not sure why you'd want to do that, but hey, for some reason there's an achievement for it, so why not? But let's get back to business. If you're in the camp, you might see some other players around you. You might also be surprised that your friend is not one of them. That is because players are split into those instances called lobbies, otherwise there would just be too many of them. To see one another, you and your friend have to be in the same lobby. Now, you might find it difficult to find an option to join your friend's lobby in the same place everything else related to multiplayer resides. Rookie mistake. To switch lobbies, you actually have to speak with your handler, where you usually choose your quests. Next thing you should do is add your friend to a link party. That will distinguish your friend from the rest of the people in the same lobby and will help you stay together in between the quests. You do that from the communications menu again. You can also make a squad. Those are kind of like guilds in other games, but also sort of lobby presets. Once you're both in the same squad, you can avoid having to sync lobbies in the future, given that both of you choose to enter your squad's lobby at the start of the game, as that doesn't happen automatically, and is actually super slow for some reason. Now that you're both friends, in the same lobby, same link party, and even same squad, you may try to go out and explore together. Nope, wrong, come on, don't be silly, we didn't get that far yet. Since one of you could have progressed further in the game, your environments might differ, so we need to figure out which one will be used for the multiplayer. If you want to share your environment, you have to do just that. Share environment from the link party menu of the communication tab of the main in-game menu. Then your friend should accept your proposal in the invitations menu, as usual. Now you should finally be ready to explore and hunt down that monster. Unfortunately, most of the time the story won't let you. And to do a story quest with a friend, you have to watch the cutscene, go through the scripted content solo, then when both of you get to the part where you have to fight, return from quest, try to join your friend again, and then run all the way back to them. Let's be honest, this is ridiculous. I might understand the reasoning of some of those overcomplications, but it's just not right. I cannot recommend this game to several of my friends only because I know that despite them potentially really enjoying it, we won't be able to properly play together for over 15 hours. And yeah, it's a deal breaker for many people. The whole system has to be significantly simplified, and the way story missions are handled has to be completely reworked, as they just can't handle multiplayer and result in the need to do those bizarre rituals with quests. The focus should be on a seamless experience, and after both you and your friend are done with the story, the multiplayer becomes much more accessible. You can explore together, decide to fight a random monster, the quest automatically begins for both of you, and when you're done, you can go right back to exploration seamlessly. There are no more hoops to jump through, and it just works. But many people will never get to that point because the multiplayer in the entirety of low rank is actively trying to stop them from playing. Together with poor performance, these are the biggest issues with the game right now, and I can only wonder how much more successful Monster Hunter Wilds could have been had Capcom made them a priority to resolve. But there is one more controversial topic for Wilds: its difficulty. Before the game was even out, several reviewers mentioned that the game wasn't particularly challenging, which really gave a Monster Hunter community a scare. It became one of the biggest topics for discussion and speculation, even though nobody involved even played the game yet. After finishing it, I can confirm that the game is indeed on the easier side, but also that the difficulty problem is a bit overblown. It doesn't stem from monsters having less health, dealing too little damage, or not being aggressive enough. On the contrary, I found enemy moveset to be varied and quite tough to adapt to at first. Instead, Monster Hunter Wilds has the same issue as the Elden Ring's endgame bosses, but in reverse. The player's toolset expanded, giving us plenty of ways to deal with the monsters, while they didn't get the same treatment and thus struggle to deal with us. By tools, I mean a lot of the improvements and quality of life changes we've received, such as the focus mod that makes it easier to land attacks even when the monster moved out of the way, the wound system that increases our own damage but also interrupts whatever the monster was doing, thus giving us yet another way of keeping them incapacitated. More options for blocking, parrying, and getting out of the way, making it easier to avoid receiving damage. Palico being able to do everything now, instead of a single thing, means that he can heal in multiple ways, though only when I'm already drinking my potions, I suppose. Plunder for resources, deal decent damage, leave traps, and even bring you from the dead, which is quite an increase in utility. In the meantime, monsters didn't really get much to keep up with all of that, especially with the reduced effectiveness of ailments and blights. Getting stunned, paralyzed, poisoned, or afflicted with anything else really is so rare in Wilds that it's concerning. I doubt anyone enjoys being unable to move or having to roll to put out a fire, but that gave monsters that inflicted those ailments a lot of identity. It also made the fights much more challenging and made preparation for them important, either by crafting armor with respective resistances and skills, or collecting materials for various potions. You really don't have to bother with any of that stuff anymore, as status effects have become a non-issue. So many armor skills are useless now, whereas they could really alter the fights in previous titles. This change is very surprising to me, because in a game where hunters are at their strongest, that could have been a way for monsters to show their own prowess and remind us not to get too careless. More common and potent afflictions could really help with the perceived difficulty in Wilds, and together with a couple more stronger monsters for HR 50 and above, would really seal the deal for anyone dissatisfied with the endgame overall. Hopefully the future title updates will address the issues I've discussed, and perception of the game will improve over time, as it did with World. But at its current state, Monster Hunter Wilds is a great game that is being held back by its performance, unintuitive and overcomplicated multiplayer system, and slightly reduced difficulty that came as a result of various improvements and quality of life changes. It's a game that takes one step back as it leaps 10 steps forward, and if you ask me, it's not a bad ratio. Is what I would say if one of those step backs wasn't the cafeteria. Bring me back my palico cooks! My furry chefs! My feline servants! Where are they? What did you do to them? What is the point of all the hunting if I can't even enjoy the cooking of my little slaves afterwards? I need them back, Capcom, ASAP. And when they're back, we can talk again about changing all of those negative reviews, alright? It'll cost you though, $2.99 per edit review voucher, you greedy palamutes! Sorry about that. It got a bit personal there. Anyway, the video is over, so thanks for watching. Not a lot of people get this far. Most won't even last 5 minutes into this video. Well, since you're here, might I interest you in my other works? I did make a critique of the Elden Ring DLC, or if it's Monster Hunter you're after, I also talked about my experience 100%ing it. I might also do some more Monster Hunter content somewhat soon, and then definitely a video on Night Train, so if that interests you, please consider subscribing. Thanks again, and hopefully I'll see you soon.